you're a parent, there's another dimension of this where there's a responsibility that you have to help guide your child's understanding of what's going on in the world. And it's not, there's not the same license or freedom to say, well, I'm just not going to read the news anymore. I don't like to talk about negative things. There's a responsibility to address this in a way that's a little bit disorienting, I think, at times too. So, doctors, would you like me to advance through the slides a little bit to
Please.
cover some
Thank you.
information? Okay, great.
Thank you so much. I completely agree with you in terms of how we sort of use avoidance as a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
And I think you're right that there's so many parents will feel like maybe they don't want their children to know these terrible things are happening. They want to protect their innocence. I fully understand and appreciate all of that. But the reality is, if we don't talk to our children, and if they spend any time outside of the home, someone else probably will. So it's probably best that they hear these things from us as parents first. But that sometimes I think we do get lulled into thinking that we're past this, and we're not. And so you can have the best intentions, but if you don't know, right? If you don't have information and you're not educating yourself, then you don't know to do better, and harm can still be perpetuated.
Parenthood, I don't think, needs to be an oppressive state, but when you live in in an environment, when you swim in an environment in which the rules of the game are weighted against the things that come along with parenthood, it certainly creates a cumulative disadvantage.
They're never too young to begin to talk about the ways in which people are different once they notice that people are different. And so I think traditionally there's been this shying away from, oh, we don't point out if people have different color skin, or even if people are different sizes, we don't point that out, which in some ways could infer that it's inherently bad, right? When it's just, no, this is part of who this person is. Have encounters and situations where their differences are going to be pointed out to them. So I think as parents, it's really important for us to be that protective factor and to offer some context that, there are people in the world who are afraid of people who are different. And so that might mean that they'll do mean or cruel things. If we don't talk about it, then that leaves children to draw their own conclusions, right? Sometimes it does come down to safety, right? That because we have all these biases and there's actually studies done on that children, particularly so Black girls and boys are perceived as less innocent and older than they really are versus white children. So then how that translates in classroom settings and in the social environment is a more punitive response to behaviors that are often developmentally typical, but maybe not always socially appropriate, which is, things that all kids go through. But the response can be harsher and sometimes life altering for children of color, where, children of color are more likely to be suspended and expelled. We have the whole school to prison pipeline. So, so those are realities. I remember my mom and my uncle, who were from a different generation, grew up in New York, but would go to visit relatives in Virginia. They drive down and they were like, 7 and 10 years old. And then my grandmother would have to have the talk with them. You cannot use that restroom, or you cannot, drink from that fountain. And it was like, well, why? But it was really a life or death. It was life or death. Like, it could be a real problem. So I think you're right that there's people, we are preoccupied with our children's behavior and how it's regulated.
A comment from somebody who's near, who sort of prompted my memory about my experience with children I work with, and then added to it, said that discussion makes me think of the fear or mean responses that individuals with disabilities experience. Differences are often not received well. We all need to point out meanness when it occurs. When you talk about the importance of being curious and kind in the face of differences. And what I think is interesting about that is, there's a lot of sort of peripheral debate about with psychologists and sociologists about like whether racism is inherent or learned, or it swung sort of back and forth over the last 50 years. But I think what's not deniable is that it's recognized, right? Like the children's brains at a certain stage are recognizing those differences, um, and 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 one of the reactions to that sort of maybe a natural fear or withdrawal from something that you experience as different. And so, but that genetic predisposition to behave a certain way is not destiny. And what the almost the entire act of part of parenting is helping to shape your child's instincts and behaviors that emerge naturally through their development in ways that will be kind and socially appropriate. And so the whether the persistence of that noticing of differences doesn't point to a problem as much as it points to the solution and need to address that as parents as part of the job.